people sort of get caught up in the moment and the back and forth about what happened today and why, whether we run up too far, too fast, whether it was a ripe excuse to sell when interest rates are backing up. Do you get worked up over this sort of thing?
Well, personally, I don't. The only day I find it's worth getting worked up on the stock market is the day I'm ready to sell, which I'm not. And, in a sense, I've been more than amazed at how much stocks have run up. I probably have a little general nervousness about where they're going to go. But to me, today feels like a bump in something. On the other hand, as interest rates move up, which they will anyway, it's inevitable stocks will back off some.
I'm amazed, too, when I talk to particularly young people, when they look at interest rates backing up and they talk about, oh, my gosh, Neil, I missed the boat on a 4% mortgage. And I'm thinking to myself, I think that's what my wife and I were paying per day when we got our first mortgage. So I'm owing to my age here, but it is what you get used to, right? So if interest rates were to back up to the degree some say they would, let's say a 10-year gets north of 3%, even 3.5%, it's now around 2.7%, 2%. Would that be a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a big deal. In the short run, it'll come sort of slowly. On the other hand, just take it from the perspective of the U.S. government. U.S. government's paying $250 billion, something like that, in interest every year. That number goes up. That's many more billions. It takes savings in a lot of programs to make up just for those rise in interest rates. And certainly house payments and how people live will be affected. I think probably what's more likely to do is house prices will come down and people's monthlies will stay more similar.
Now, I know you look at this in a different way and wanted to find a way to sort of go through the government books and find out where this money goes. You talked about even the slightest uptick in rates, and when you're carrying the debt that we are, it doesn't take much for you to realize you could start choking on that. What do you think of all that?
Well, we've done some plotting recently. I was interested in what people talk about in States of the Union, since we're ready for that today. And what are the top topics? And one of the top 10 is the deficit. And every president talks about the deficit in their first State of the Union address. And then the number of times they mention it just goes down, as long, sort of systematically when they're in office. We might think of that as deficit amnesia, if you will. And the deficit just keeps going up and up and up and up. And as a businessman, I don't understand how that works. I thought there's something about revenue and expenses matching. You can take a look at some of that on our USA Fact site, which is where I put all the numbers that are interesting, I think, to me as a shareholder in the U.S. government. Tonight's State of the Union is kind of like a shareholder call a little bit for the president.
Yeah, but they have those rowdy shareholders there, too. And the decorum is such that it can get pretty raucous. Now, we're told that a dozen Democratic congressmen and women will not be there tonight, and the president is going to try to talk about bipartisanship on immigration, on infrastructure, all of that. How do you handicap all that?
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. As we've looked at what are the top words that presidents use in State of the Union addresses, neither immigration nor infrastructure has been in the top 10 as you look back to all the presidents through 1980. It's just not something they've talked about, and President Trump will strike out in new areas. Can you get bipartisanship on some of these things? You might think you could on bridge quality, road quality, and yet even looking at the numbers, it's not exactly clear that more spending is really going to drive infrastructure improvements. So we'll have to wait and see.
But part of that new spending would be with money we technically don't have. You could argue the same with so many other priorities. The president is going to outline, I'm told tonight, something that would involve $200 billion of federal money up front, leverage off of that for private initiatives. You think something like that could work?
Well, if you take a look at what kind of private investment has been, R&D and CapEx, going back to 1980, it's been a steady and systematic rise, up and up. It's almost exponential a little bit as opposed to even linear. So when the president says we're going to stimulate more private investment, in a sense that surprises me. No matter what government's done over the last 38 years, it's been steady. Economic, sort of bumps with bubbles and recessions. You get a little bit of perturbation. But it's hard for me to believe myself that almost anything the federal government does is going to drive that up much. And so I'm a little skeptical about taking on that extra deficit money. Doesn't make sense to me.
All right. Steny, I'm sorry. I'm talking about my next guest already, Steve Ballmer. Thank you very, very much. Very good seeing you again.